Hi Rick, thought I'd give you a video update of what my system looks like. Um, this is my jury rigged roaster, and down here this is just a box, and introduced into the box is positive air pressure coming out of this shop vac. Okay, the shop vac is controlled manually by this SCR, which I put a heat sink on because it seems to get pretty hot. Up here, this is just a cake pan that holds the roaster assembly. This and down underneath here are parts and pieces of a couple of poppers and two heating elements from poppers for a total of 2400 watts. This is a bake around Pyrex tube excuse me, that's just been taped on to the parts and pieces of the poppers. This is a thermocouple probe, and as you can see, it's a fairly small diameter probe, so it's pretty sensitive. The probe goes over here into a thermocouple Phidget, and you can put up to 4 thermocouples in. That Phidget plugs into the hub, the Phidget vent hub, and that goes up into the computer, and using the Artisan software will plot the roast. The computer also produces a signal to get the roast to follow a background curve, and it's kind of hard to see the background curve because the roaster followed it very carefully. But if you see right here, there's a light gray line, and that light gray line is the background curve, and the roaster followed it almost perfectly except for right here at the start. So the output of the computer comes back over here to the vent hub and into this Phidget, which gives me plus or minus 10 volts. I think I wrote 12 on my email, but it's 10 volts, and I just use the 0 to plus. I don't use the minus 10, and that 0 to 10 volts comes over here and plugs and goes into the proportional SCR, which I've put on a heat sink and a muffin fan to keep it cool. So basically what happens, we take I take 10 ounces roughly of bean. I'm going to try to do this. Pour it into the tinder. And now it's going to get kind of loud, and so I'll start the roast process, and then probably do another video of it once we're fairly close to the end. You can see the probe is well down into the bean pile right now. So here goes the fan. Come over here and turn. I've got there's the background curve that you can see, and we're gonna turn it on. And there's the current temperature, 62.8. We're going to start the process. Come down here and click charge. Wherever it is, there it is. And now this will start following the curve. This over here, this is the heat slider. And you can see the heat starting to go up and down. And it'll take this a second to kind of catch up. That dotted line is a graphic indication of the rate of rise or slope of the curve. You can see that slope's going to start coming up. Roughly 4-minute mark, and you can see that it's stabilized to the background curve. Down here, this is a graphical representation of this slider to show how the heater has been continuously changing to get that curve to line up. This is the rate of rise curve over here. I try to maintain a fairly constant loft of the beans throughout the roast so that they stay down in the pile, but they're still constantly churning. Here we're moving in on first crack, and I've cut back the SCR several times to keep the loft fairly constant. And right around first crack here is where things can get unstable because the beans are going exothermic, and I'm going to mark first crack down here. And you can see I marked first crack at 397.8 degrees Fahrenheit. You might be able to hear the crack. Here we're coming up on the 13-minute mark. You can see right here there was a little bit of a dip in the rate of rise where the heater was trying to compensate for the beans going exothermic, but it stayed fairly flat. There's a little bit of a dip right there, and we're closing in on finishing the roast. And we'll probably finish somewhere around 15 minutes, which is what I've set the background for. Should take us right to second crack around 15 minutes. I think we're beginning to hear second crack. And here closing in on the finish. I'm going to cut back on the loft a little, so I don't want it blowing the beans out the top. And I think I'll go ahead and end the roast down here at drop. And I've got to be careful to cut back the loft even more, or it'll blow the beans out the top. And you can see the temperature started to drop. The heat went to 0. We're on our way down. The delta BT is very negative. And that'll work its way down to about 175 or 180 and I'll dump it out. Right now, what it's doing, it's entered the cooling phase, and it's pulling 65-degree air off the basement floor and blowing it through the beans, and that's the fastest way for me to cool the beans. Here we are at 175. And I'll mark cool ends. Turn off the air. Pull the probe out. This takes both hands to do it, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to upend this and pour the beans into this colander. So there are the finished beans. Nice, fairly dark roast. So let's take a look at how we did. It took a little while to stabilize, but by, 3 minutes or so, it's on the line. You can see initially there's quite a bit of rate of rise trying to catch up with the line, and then it works its way down. You can see a gray line here. That is the projected rate of rise curve, and it catches up with it down here somewhere around 4.5 minutes. But the temperature curve is awfully close all the way up. Little bit of a bump right there at first crack, that's to be expected, and then it corrects for that. A little bit of a bump as it's approaching second crack, again, no great surprise. And I designed this particular roast to roast until a little past 15 minutes. Made it up to 433 degrees. Turned off the heat, and by 19 minutes it was down to 175, 170 degrees, ready to dump.